So I'm going to now move to Q&A because I feel like we've been talking a lot to everyone today. And, you know, a lot of us have come together because you have certain questions on your mind, right? And I'm not sure that all of them were addressed in the session. So I'd like to open the floor to anyone who has questions. If you're too shy to put up your hand and say a question, we will definitely take written questions. So you feel free to write down any questions you have and send them to the front. Okay, can you take this one? Yeah.
Most of what we've covered so far is your relationship with your children and you nurturing them and maybe vice versa. What about outside factors like other people, possibly, you know, in-laws or your own parents getting involved in the kind of nurturing you're trying to do?
So how to deal with other extenuating factors, other family members who might exert influence over your child when you're trying to direct them in a certain way, and sometimes they contradict that. So how to deal with that? Do you want to, Shaykh Faraz?
Bismillah. The Prophet ﷺ said, each of you is a shepherd, and each of you is responsible for their flock. And the Prophet ﷺ meant exactly what he said, with all the implications of what it means. Right? So you're responsible for your flock, right? And you'll be asked about them. So this is one of the tricky things of parenting, right? One is with one's own parents and relatives, and then there's external influences, right? With family and relatives, we have to distinguish between two things. One is rights, and then the other issue is right dealings, right? So, and the key to it is akhlaq, is good character. In that, let's say your parents are saying, well, we want the kids to sit and watch cartoons because you watched cartoons when you were a kid. And that's not part of what you want your kids to be exposed to for many, not just religiously, but educationally. So you have a right, you are responsible for your children, right? So you have a right not to allow these influences. But you have a responsibility to respond to people with the appropriate good character. So with parents, for example, there's no excuse not to be respectful for them. They say one of the most difficult things in life is, what if your parents are doing something haram? Right? There are two responsibilities. You are obligated to command the good, and you're obligated to be respectful. But which one do you do? Both. Right? This is your responsibility in terms of action. This is your responsibility in terms of attitude and conduct, how you do it. So the same thing, there are some things that are secondary. You also need to know priorities, right? You don't like your children eating a lot of meat. I'm not suggesting that you should dislike meat, but they want to have them take an extra piece of meat. Your child will not die with the extra piece of meat, unless it happens all the time. So some things you got to let go on, right? But things that are fundamental to their religious well-being or important to their worldly well-being, and there's certain things. There's influences that are very negative, right? Like television, for example, right? Even in worldly terms, so you don't want them involved in playing computer games, for example. But you have to distinguish between those two things. You have a right to pursue the best interests of the child, but at the same time you have a responsibility to be respectful. The other thing is, you don't have to explain everything, right? The best way, I remember when I was in Jordan, one of the scholars, there's a couple of scholars who were really busy refuting them. So that Shaykh got a number of his students, all of us were involved in teaching. He said, Shaykh so-and-so is quite enthusiastic these days about refuting us. We're going to be responding with silence. We're not going to say anything. I said sometimes the most effective response is silence. It's not to say anything. And sometimes if they won't understand, you don't have to explain everything. Okay? Sometimes the best response is a smile. When Umar and I went to Pakistan in 2007, we were homeschooling. But if you imagine, if you think Desi, in India and Pakistan, the single biggest concern in a family is what? Yeah, children's schooling. Right? It's one of the biggest expenses they'll have, and one of the biggest challenges, get them into the right school. By right school, of course, means the most prestigious, the whatever. And we're not schooling. And there, of course, everyone minds everyone else's business. So it's a truly subversive act. So everyone had explained. So first question, where are your kids going to school? Say, homeschool. Even like my cousins, Faraz bhai, kya kar rahe ho? Like everyone wants to give me a lecture. And now, and no one's willing to listen why, for the case for homeschooling. So I figured out the response. Yeah, I just say they registered with an academy in California, which make no sense whatsoever. Well, they were. There's an academy in California, the Kinza Institute. They're registered with it, and then I changed the subject. But you don't need to explain everything. Why don't your kids watch TV? You don't have to explain it. Just make sure they don't. Change the subject, right? The kids are sitting watching cartoons. Why don't they do that? They say, wasn't the biryani really tasty? How was the biryani? You didn't eat it. So how was the biryani? So mashallah, what was the recipe? You couldn't care less. Change the subject, right? But remain firm on these things, but without arguing, right? Without arguing, right? So that's how one would navigate that. Now, in terms of external influences, I'll let Shaykh Zahir.
I thought you answered it. Yeah.
Like what about friends in the neighborhood or?
Quite honestly, I remember when I was young, and my friends would ask me to do or to go certain places. You know what? I wouldn't even ask my parents for permission. I just would say, no, I can't go. I wouldn't even bring it to my parents. You know why? You know why that would happen? When my friends asked me to do certain things or go certain places, I would not go and ask my parents because they had established their authority as my parents. Period. That's why. If you establish your authority as the parent, the ones who will say yes or no, and you gave them guidelines, they will automatically know what you're going to say, and they will tell their friends. They're not going to run into the house and say, Ahmed, Peter, Bob, whoever, wants me to go do this or wants me to go do that. Can I go here? Can I go there? Because they already would have gotten the sense from your authority and your rules and the principles that you have not only explained to them, but you have shown within yourself that you follow, and the guidelines that you have, that you set, that they would guess the answer to those questions. They would have guessed the answers to those questions. It is part of establishing the authority in your household. Now, when they're small, they may not know. So they may come and say, grandpa, aunt, uncle, khala, whoever wants me to do this, wants us to eat this, wants us to go here, or they may even come and say, well, they have this, they watch TV, they go to the movies, whatever. How do you do it? First of all, if your children, obviously the way that you parent may not be the same as other people, perhaps not. If you don't allow your children to watch TV, may not be the same with their cousins or their relatives. It may not be the same with the kids on the street. It may not be the same, the restrictions that you have with your children. So how do you deal with external influences coming? Is explaining to your children by not disparaging of others. You don't disparage of the ones who do watch TV. You don't disparage of their cousins. You don't disparage of their aunt or their uncle. You don't disparage. But what you say is very important. You say to them, this is the way that we have chosen because we think that this is better for ourselves and therefore it's better for you. That's all you say. And you don't negotiate. Again, there's no negotiation. That's what you say. They've asked a question, you've explained it, and that's it. They'll accept it. They may say, oh, I don't like you. They may say it. They may say, I hate you. You know what? Innately, they don't. They love you. They may say it, but they don't. They may say, oh, my mom is too hard. My dad is too hard. They may say it. They may throw it at you. Guess what they're doing? They're just testing you. That's all. They don't believe it. They don't feel it. They know it, that they love you. And at the end of the day, they know that this is for the good of them. So they throw it out there in order to weaken you. And in our day, a lot of parents are then weakened by it because they don't want to hear their kids saying, I don't like you anymore. They may say it. I don't like you anymore. Okay, go to your room. You're not going to eat tonight.
Brother, I have tweens and teens who
Yeah.
then respond to me and say it's haram to force me to do it. You're trying to be authoritative and set the right guideline and ask them to come to the session tomorrow at 2 p.m. They're listening. How do you meet that feedback from them? It's haram to force me.
Show me the ayah. Show me the sunnah. Show me the hadith that makes this haram.
Right. But
No,
they're
yeah.
on the same wavelength and they don't want to come. How do you overcome that resistance?
Yeah, you have to, at the end of the day, they're going to resist things that they know technically is good for them. But you have to be flexible enough that not everything that you want them to do, that they're going to do, unless it deals with what is wajib. Unless it deals with what is wajib, right?
I mean,
But you have to. I know he's gonna come in. So you have to do. Let's see what Shaykh Faraz has to say.
So, I mean, for me personally, I actually wrote about this on the Seekers Hub blog a couple of years ago because I wrote this article. My father was smarter than I thought because honestly, as a teenager, I thought the most annoying person alive for me was my dad. No, in the sense that there's a lot of things that I wanted to do that were just not up for negotiation, right? But my dad, and the scary thing was, my dad would rarely get upset. I mean, sometimes he would get upset, and but I could deal with that, right? To be honest, like, when my dad got upset, I felt I was in control, right? He's upset, he'll feel bad, just bear with it. The scary thing was when he'd be totally calm. He'd just look at me and give me this look. He still gives me the jitters. The other day he told me, get a haircut. He just looked at me like, where do you come from? So I committed to getting a haircut, right? So, but some things were clear, like, so that's one aspect, right? But we have to sometimes work towards that. We have to work towards that. That some things are not negotiable, right? And then the kids realize it. Like when I was finishing high school, like often we had these really annoying weekend trips. Go visit some friends of the parents. We didn't have much family at that time in Canada. Go for a family outing. Really? We're going to the park? Like I'm 17. Like what's going on? But it's not for. We are going to the park and you're coming. Right? It's not up for discussion. But then, or if lunch is served, everyone is supposed to sit. It's not supposed to. Everyone will sit. Right? And it's not up for discussion. And then afterwards, you really appreciate the wisdom of it. But the beautiful thing was that, they rarely, everyone, once in a while, they get upset, whatever. But with my dad, I always felt his authority in that
So it's it's not haram to force your child.
I'm not going to get involved in that specific thing, but at the same time, part of being a shepherd, right? I get distracted, so I read about shepherding. It's very interesting, right? One of the scholars in Damascus mentioned, like, if you look at animals, right? If you can't force an animal, right? Now, you don't tell your kids that they're sheep, right? But sometimes sheep will resist, right? Sometimes sheep will resist. The ideal case with a shepherd is that you're setting the direction, and they're going willingly. That's like cruise control shepherding. You know, you've set the direction, they're walking towards the goal, and that's part of tarbiyah. You've instilled that thing in them. If you find resistance, it's because the meaning underlying the tarbiyah is lacking. So sometimes you realize that, okay, they're not going where you want to go, so sometimes you have to recalibrate. That right now the tarbiyah priority may not be to do that specific thing, but I need to work on the meaning underlying it. And that they should want to come to a class of religion. They should want to do the things that are their advantage. So there may be some things that you need to work on before to facilitate that. Because also with sheepology, right, which should be a science, is that if the sheep is fleeing, right, sometimes the sheep is going in the wrong direction and a little redirection will bring them back. Sometimes a little something will just make sure they go in the right direction. But when the sheep are going completely off track, sometimes you have to be patient with them. And that's part of being a wise parent. Sometimes you can't demand. Like, you know, I actually sometimes ask my parents now, how come you didn't comment on such and such thing? My mother still like, says, Dimagh kharab hai? Are you crazy? I said, do you think you would have listened? I said, no. Then why would you want me to say something, right? So sometimes you have to know which battles to pick as well. But one should be clear what's the standard, right? Because never fight a battle that you're going to lose, right? But you have to get to a point where you are in that phase. So sometimes one has to pick it. That ideally you'd want them to be doing something, but they're not there yet. Then don't push too hard. Sayyidina Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan was asked, how come you get your way with all people? And he was known. Even other companions were amazed. How does he get his way? Sometimes they disagree with him on something, but they'll all end up agreeing with what he said. Like, I said, how do you do it? He said, relationships are like a thread. Right? When someone is tugging, you have to let go a little bit. But if they let go, you got to tug. Right? Because if you tug when they're tugging, the thread could snap. But if you let go and they let go, it's a missed opportunity. Right? So that's part of the shepherding exercise. So you have to know when to tug and when not to. But getting in that situation, right, of where, of setting clear expectations, because if you do set an expectation, right, that this is expected, you should only say that if you're going to follow through with it. Because if you say that we're attending class on Sunday at 2 p.m., it's happening. Right? But if you're not sure, right, say the good or remain silent. Right? If you're not sure whether they listen, etc., then don't set that standard until you can follow through on it.
Okay, I'm just going to add mother's perspective on the question. I think sometimes when you appeal to the emotional side of children, right? Like, I guess you have younger. How old are they? 12 and 11. Just appealing to their, going back to the basic principles that you've been teaching, that, we're seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first pillar of that is seeking knowledge, right? And they need to see that the parents are very keen to seek knowledge. And then just tell them, I'd love to, I'm working on myself. I want to learn, and I don't want to go alone. I'd like you to be there with me. I'd like you to benefit as well. And I'd like to go together. So just working on that aspect of it so that they can understand, well, why are you going? Because sometimes if you just say, you know what, Dars is at 2 o'clock, that's it, I've said it, we're going. And you're gonna pull them against their will, they're going to hate it, right? They're gonna hate every minute there. They're going to be people who are, even corrupting the gathering. They're not interested in what's happening. They've been forced to come, right? So when you appeal to the side of, you know what, let's go together, let's work on ourselves. There's problems that all of us are facing. Let's learn how to deal with them. Let's take benefit, and we get reward for every minute we're in that gathering, and you'll get reward for listening to your mother and coming happily. Let's not fight about this. And then, to make it even more enjoyable, let's say there's a lot of restaurants around the area. Let's go together for lunch after that, right? Or their favorite is Krispy Kreme donuts. Like, let's get some of that after the class. So then, they'll sway, right? And then maybe they're fighting you that first class that you're trying to get to, but the second one that you're going to, they'll be like, less resistant, like, oh, do we have to? And then you're like, yeah, but you know what? Those donuts were really good last week. Let's get those again. So you're associating a very positive experience going together, although you wouldn't want to eat too much Krispy Kreme donuts for obvious reasons. But you'd phase that out gradually, right? When they have that, then you're getting into a beneficial family experience that everyone's enjoying, which is the end result that you're looking for, inshallah.
Just a question about what Shaykh Zahir mentioned, and I want to get the Shaykh and the mother perspective. I appreciate the idea of asserting authority and not rationalizing or explaining, decisions or commandments or things like that. But for kids of a certain age, they tend to be very inquisitive at a certain age, and they ask why. And it's more often than not a challenge, at least as far as I can tell, it's curiosity. So how do you address that curiosity without suppressing that natural, inquisitiveness, which is healthy, while at the same time affirming your authority and not rationalizing and showing weakness?
Yeah, that's a good question. Mike, the comment about exerting your authority, the question is, obviously kids are quite inquisitive, so they may be asking when you lay down the authority and say no to something or yes to something, or you're going to go somewhere, they may ask why. And it's common amongst children to ask why. Or, the parent may start to negotiate with them or tell them the reason and so on. So the question is, how do you balance between their inquisitive side, right, of wanting to know something from their own understanding and gaining some wisdom, and exerting your authority to not negotiate. With younger children, it's more of, with me, my understanding from what I've read is, with younger children, it's more of them following what you have set out to do without them asking question. And why is that? Because that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded us to do. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us, the first part of the Ba'ath of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Meccan period was for what reason? It was to exert tawheed. It was to exert the oneness of Allah. That this is the amr, this is the command, you follow it. Right? So likewise with children in the early stages of their lives, you have to exert that you are the authority, you are the parent. So you don't have to, because it's natural for, if they want to do something and they tell you and then you're going to say no to them, they're going to automatically say why. They won't. Now, you can answer it, in which case you'll be left with a lot of whys to answer, right? Thereafter. And they're going to expect to gain the reason. Now, in negotiation, right, you're not negotiating with a child. You're not. When you exert authority, I'm an employer, right? I'm an employer. So when someone comes to me and asks me something and I have a policy for it, I will answer yes or no, right? If they say why to me, doesn't work. Doesn't work. Also, because there's a very fine line. Now some of you may think I'm a real prick, but but there are policies. A parent has policies also. They do. When you start to answer the question why to younger children, right? What you're doing, you're bringing yourself down to their level. That's in their head. In their head, you're not teaching them wisdom. You're bringing yourself down to explain why on their level. They will see you not as a parent, they will see you as a peer. That's what they'll see you as. And it will go downhill. It will go downhill. When you say to a child, I teach too, I teach little children. In a classroom of children, the teacher says, this is the instruction, this is what we're going to do today. And if a child says, why? Why? Because I just said it. I just said it. That's it. You do not avail little children, smaller children, the ability to bring you down to their level. That's what they ask on playground when they ask their friends. But they shouldn't do it to a parent or to an adult. They shouldn't. Now when they get older, my kids are not older, I teach younger children too. When they get older, yeah, that may be the case where they're inquisitive for that reason, so that they want to know, so that they themselves can yuwazin, they themselves can judge themselves when they hit that situation of what they're going to do, so they may need the reason behind it. In those cases, a parent should actually, before they ask why, but it's case to case, depending on what they ask. It's case to case, depending on what they ask when they're older, of the reasoning behind the answer that you gave them to do something or not to do something, right? But you have to play it, A, you have to know your kids, and B, you have to understand at which point it comes to where you're going to give them the reasoning and the rationality behind the decision that you made, right? But with smaller kids, I don't think you should ever bring yourself down to that level with them, because that is a level of where you're starting to negotiate. Who negotiates with a child except someone who wants to lose their authority over them? Allahu Alam.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I ask your forgiveness in advance because I think there is a difference of opinion on this subject, because I would say the actual opposite. That when they say that why question, especially from the little children, it's critical in their thought formation. They're not asking they're not challenging authority. They just want to understand. Like if I give an example of the weekly flyers that come out from the newspaper, all the ads and things like that, and you say, don't open the ad section, don't open the paper. Why? Because I said so. Khalas, I said so, that's it, right? And then they close, you lose that learning opportunity, right? So when I explain, you know what, we're not opening it because, a lot of times people's auras are uncovered. Aura means it's their nakedness, and it's actually, you get a sin if you look at that. And we don't want to do that. Why would we don't want to see it. So if we were looking for something in particular and we come across that part, they'd see that I could cover that person and I'm trying to look for something. So they'd see it and then they would, I remember my relatives, they used to find it really funny, a 2-year-old flipping through the ad set, they were looking for something, but they'd cover anyone who wasn't dressed properly because they had that learning experience, right? When they ask why, you're helping them to learn, the proper thought process. And I think it's a blessing because they're learning, and they keep asking that why question, not to challenge you, not to question what you're saying, but they just want to understand, just like what Brother Ahmed was saying. They just want to understand what are you saying, because next time they won't have to ask. They'll understand the principle, right? So,
but I think the why that is not. There's a difference between the why that is explanatory,
whys, yes,
right, to explain, and I don't think Shaykh Zahir is saying don't explain anything, right, and be arbitrary and But there's a difference between explaining why in terms of the benefit, etc., and explain the why where you have to justify and prove why you're doing it. That unless you can prove it to me, I won't do it. right?
The main thing is that, one of the things of established authority is that you want to get to a point where your children, when you answer them, that they actually trust you. That the reason that they actually trust, and they trust the reason behind your answer. So yeah, you have to pick the moments, you have to, right? But, not every time that they ask why, you should answer like, I want to go out and play at the other park with my friends, and you say no, right? I don't think it justifies an answer, because the answer is within them. With some kids, the answer within them, they'll know automatically, it's too far, I know. We're too young and it's too far. So they'll know. So you don't have to answer their why. So you have to pick the moments in which in which you answer them, because you want to give them some knowledge, but at the same time, you have to establish your authority for them to trust you. That they have to trust you. Like, there are times when my parents themselves would say no, and I did not ask why. I didn't, because I already knew the answer. I knew the answer. But if they answering me all the time, then your child, imagine, your child will think that there's a leeway in to now debate you. Once you open up that and it may be a learning experience, but they'll try to debate you, and it does not spawn well. It doesn't, right? In some cases. So, you have to. It is a balance, right? There is a balance that you have to establish, right? There is a balance that you have to establish, and Allah Subhanahu wa Taala help us to establish it.
Also, isn't there two types of whys, istifham and mukhalaf, somebody who's asking for an understanding and one who's opposing?
Yes, so Ustad Rashad asks a question that it's an informative question, that are there not two types of why? It's a good, that there's different types of why, right? So, there's a whole slew of why. One is, of istifham, for clarification. And that's welcome, right? But sometimes it's clear, right? The rule is already clear that, okay, we have lunch when we're at home. We have lunch and dinner together. They know it. They're not really asking, right? Sometimes they say, "Why do I have to come?" Right? It is not for clarification. They already know the answer. It's clear, and there's of inkar, right? Of denial, right? So the istifham, right? But even with the istifham, part of the thing is, and that's part of tarbiyah, right? That in raising the child, a key thing is you have to set the direction. You have to set the direction. And if the direction is set, then the specifics are clear. That what are we about as a family? What are we working on, right? So, like a simple thing that all children expect is like, if there's homework, say, do your homework, right? Like, yeah, because the expectation is clear. We take education seriously, right? So, but the establishing of authority, I think, it's not to be a dictator, right? But to be the shepherd. The shepherd is setting the direction of the family, and which is where one of my favorite lines of poetry, Imam Busiri saying about the Prophet ﷺ, right? That all these virtues that the Prophet ﷺ had as a child, and he comments, إِذَا حَلَّتِ الْهِدَايَةُ قَلْبًا, if guidance is rooted in the heart, right? They know what you're trying to do, right? And you shouldn't just set arbitrary rules on them. Said, Mimi, stand on one toe and touch your nose. Why? Because I'm your father. No, right? Like they trust you because you care for their good, and you've made the direction clear. Then, so that's part of it. You need to be a shepherd towards the good. You do not be arbitrary, right? So I think that's and with that as well, different parents differ in degrees of emphasis, but it is a real innovation, right? It is a real innovation. Look at most our parents, or look, if you're younger, maybe look one generation back. In all cultures, it's a given, right? It's part of human experience that the young defer to the old, right? The young defer to the old. The young respect the old, their judgment, right? And these are values that we need to instill. This idea of, everyone's the same, right? I just received, and some of these old world values, they're important. That anyone who's older than you, you'd never just refer to them by name, right? Someone sent a message, and they're like 20 years younger than the person they messaged, and they refer to the person by first name. It's inconceivable. They're old enough to be your aunt, right? So, you may not call them Auntie Rufaida, but you call them Sister Rufaida. Like that expressed respect. But where it begins the most is with the parents, right? That has to be clear. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitate. And it sometimes is difficult because they see other models of parenting and so on, but you do yourself a great favor. One of the things that I think needs highlighting as well is and Shaykh Zahir talked about it in his lesson, which is really important. One of the best fuels for sustaining your parenting is always, you have to, as a parent, always connect with the prophetic character. Because you want to instill prophetic character in your children, but to do so, we have to strive as best we can to try to mirror something of the prophetic character. And we'll fall short of it, right? We'll fall short of it, right? All of us, nobody. The companions, the best of generations, they admitted that no one could compare to him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But this is what you're trying to instill in your children, and this is what you're trying to uphold as a parent, as best you can, right? So that's something. And now, alhamdulillah, in English, we have many very good books on prophetic character, right? So that's something your children can connect with as well, about connecting them with the Prophet ﷺ, with his life, with his example. Stories are non-threatening, but they convey a lot of meanings. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, as a parent, how do you judge the merits of religious experiences for your child over their other interests? The example I'm thinking of is during Ramadan, some parents choose to bring their children, sometimes very young children, the babies, to Tarawih, and it can be very late, and it results in the child sleeping through the day, or just having their schedule completely mixed up. So, how does someone position on that, and what reward is there for a parent who says, I'll set this aside in the interest of my child's normal running, functioning day?
You've asked the wrong person. I'm an imam of a mosque. Everyone get the question? How do you distinguish in the rights of the religious experience of children with that of their other experiences that you may want or they may want to have? And the example the sister used was in Ramadan, taking them, even small children, to the mosque and having their sleep patterns be interrupted and delayed and so on and so forth. The principle of that is a very simple principle. In a masjid, children who come to the masjid should have the wherewithal to be able to behave in the mosque without creating any problems for the musalli and the people who are there to offer their prayers or to study. That is the principle, right? Some of the ulama also say, in Sham, we didn't see young children in the mosque because of the propensity maybe of leakage of an accident happening on the carpet. It happened even in our mosque, right, in Ramadan. So for children, their rights of going to bed on time, their rights of sleep, their rights of having normalcy in their home over that of a crowded masjid takes precedence over the right that you want to give them a religious experience. They'll experience it, don't worry. They'll come and experience Taraweeh, Qiyam, Tahajjud. They'll come to that experience. but allow them at the point where they're kids and they can run freely without without the uncle stopping them and shouting at them. Allow them not to experience that, because it's not a positive experience in a masjid for them to be yelled at by an uncle that looks like Shaykh Faraz. It's not, because they're going to have a bad experience thinking about imams or looking like me. I'll include myself in this. They're going to have a bad experience, and it will happen, right? Because they'll run, they'll throw bottles around, they'll be with their friends, they'll make commotions, and so on and so forth. So it's not a positive experience to them. It's not. So, in terms of their religious experience, it is based on their ages. But they can experience Islam in Ramadan, even when they're young at your home. Decorate the house, read them stories, take them to buy iftar, take them to groceries, teach them about the cultural practices or the cultural things that you do in Ramadan in terms of decoration, food to prepare, and so on and so forth. You can do all of that within the home. The mosque experience, because if a child who disrupts a person in prayer in a masjid, the parent will get the sin. Parent will get the sin. And it's not an experience that you want to have, it's not an experience that the child want to have, and it's not an experience that is positive for them. And in most cases, my experience in masjid is that there will be someone, there will be an uncle, who will either grab them, shout at them, or do something horrible to them. That's my experience. So it's better when they're young, just keep them at home and talk to them about Ramadan. Or take them during, when in the off salah times to be in the masjid, right? So that they see, more people in the masjid and so on and so forth, and not during one of the prayers. Allahu Alam, this is the best way. I know you want them to experience Islam, but have them experience Islam from you, from them looking at you, and they see Ramadan in you, right? They see that you're busy with Salah, they see that you're busy with Quran, they see you. So they in themselves, they don't have to go to a mosque to know that this is their special month. They'll see it within your own practice, and then get them involved in decorating and reading about Ramadan and so on and so forth. Allahu A'lam.
Can I, just to add to that too, like how do you get from A to B? Because like you were talking about, like not bringing them. Okay, so when do you bring them? So it's important to choose your, when you're going to do that. You have to start with just short kind of experiences that they'll be quiet. You have to talk to them a lot in advance about the importance of etiquette in places of learning or the masajid. Talk to them about, because it gets confusing when they see other kids are running around and nobody's saying anything to them. It's the parent that has to, from day one, if you're entering that building, you have to understand in advance, you can't run around, right? You can't be talking to your friend. You have to be you have the best manners possible, and the best manners in the masjid or the learning center where people are coming together to learn or worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be quiet. You have to be really quiet. You have to sit with your mommy. And it is the mother initially, like until they're able to sit quietly, I'd say about 6 or 7, I think age 7, 8, then they're able to sit without anything in front of them, and they can go to the brother's side. But sitting quietly with the mother and just, and that's the thing, you're teaching, because that's the best thing you can give your children ultimately is proper manners or adab. So have them sit next to you when you're ready to take them into that setting. Have an activity folder or quiet coloring. If you can make it to do with the subject, that's even better. Like I was talking about before, when I was taking my children to fiqh classes at very young ages, I would sit with them and I would be listening to the class and I'd be cartooning it for them as the teacher's talking, and they'd find it fascinating and they were learning, right? So, thinking of innovative ways where you can have them attend those settings without being disruptive and benefit, you need to think along those lines. And then so you start with short classes, and then you can gradually get it longer and longer until you can attend full sessions. But, alhamdulillah, I was able to attend the The RIS convention, not the convention, the retreat, taking like very young children, 2, 3, 4-year-olds to the convention, but they would sit silently because that's what they were taught. So just keeping that in mind, inshallah.
This actually for Shaykh Zahir is about the books that you mentioned, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge, and the latest one. Which one do you think would be best to read first? Or are they completely different?
They're all completely different in their focus.
So the boys and girls one seems pretty obvious. Boys and childhood.
Yeah, Boys Adrift, Girls on the Edge. They're good. Collapse of Parenting is a good read. It'll take you a couple of days to read it, but it's a good read. Boys on the Edge Boys on the Edge is good because we have in our society, and he says it too, so I'm not in trouble saying it. I mean, we see it, is boys today picking up female traits. The demasculinity of boys in our day. And then people speak about it. They do. Psychologists have spoken about it. And, that's what he talks about. That's what he talks about. So, Boys Adrift is an interesting read. And it's all clinical because he talks about the cases that he's come across. Well,
We'll take one more question from the sister side. Any questions, Shell? Okay, great. Go ahead.
At what age can this stop?
Yeah. So,
when you're older,
yeah.
in your late 20s or something, and the elders are sitting and talking, can you?
No, so in terms of children talking in front of adults, I mean, this is not like kids will be seen but not heard at all, right? There's a family meal, etc. There's a time for kids to talk, but there's also a time when adults are having a conversation, right? Particularly as a formal, there's people just sitting. Sometimes you have a casual family gathering where people are just sitting. Okay, what happened this weekend? That's very different from, there's an adult topic, or for example, if I'm consulting my father about something, and if the kids come in and interrupt and start, so there's a time for to know that this is an adult topic. So be quiet, be patient, wait till that's finished, till now it's informal, etc. Then there's the right time to speak, and other times when it is more casual. And the Prophet ﷺ also had casual conversation with kids. He knew about the pets of the children of the companions. The half-brother of Sayyidina Anas ibn Malik had a little pet bird, and the Prophet ﷺ kept tabs of it. So when it died, the Prophet ﷺ went up to the child. He already knew before he asked him. He heard that the pet bird of this little child had died. So he went up to the child, patted him on the back. He was really sad because his little songbird had died. And he said, Ya Abu Umair, ماذا فعل النغير? Oh little Abu Umair, what happened to the little songbird? Right? Now that's not an adult topic, right? There's a time for, you need for love, just this, but an informal discussion. There's a time when parents are talking. It's very common, like the mother and father are discussing something serious, and the kids come and say, I want, that's where adab is needed, right? Wait. And if they're taking a lot in something urgent, that, so-and-so's taking too long in the washroom and I need to use the washroom, it's desperate, what do I do? So then they should know how to ask for permission, right? Unless it's a total emergency, right?